That night, the alley breathed with silence too thick to be natural. The kind that comes before blood is spilled or destinies collide. He heard the whimper first, faint as a dying ember, and something ancient in his chest tightened. The apex vampire had walked this earth for centuries, had seen empires crumble and gods forgotten, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of those fragile breaths, or for the 50 pairs of glowing eyes that would come for him at dawn, demanding answers he didn't yet know how to give. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but the city still wept. Water dripped from fire escapes, pooled in the cracks of ancient cobblestone, and reflected the dim glow of streetlights that flickered like dying stars. The night was cold, sharp enough to sting mortal lungs, but Lucien Thorne felt nothing beyond the rhythm of his own eternal heartbeat, slow, deliberate, unchanging. He moved through the shadows with the grace of something that had forgotten what it meant to be prey. His footsteps made no sound. His presence left no trace. Centuries had taught him to exist between breaths, to slip through the world like smoke through fingers. But tonight, something was different. The air tasted wrong. Lucien paused at the mouth of an alley, his pale eyes narrowing. The scent hit him first, copper and salt unmistakable. Blood, fresh, but beneath it, something else, something wild, something that made the predator in him recoil instinctively, as if recognizing a boundary not meant to be crossed. He should have walked away. He had survived this long by knowing when to turn his back, when to let the world bleed without him. Involvement bred complications. Complications bred weakness. And weakness, for an apex vampire, was a luxury he couldn't afford. But then he heard it, a whimper, soft, fragile, the sound of something small, trying desperately not to break. Lucien's jaw tightened. His fingers flexed at his sides, the only outward sign of the war raging inside him. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to return to the shadows where he belonged. But his feet moved forward anyway, drawn by something he couldn't name, something older than logic, deeper than survival. The boy was crumpled against the alley wall like discarded cloth. He couldn't have been more than 12. His clothes were torn, soaked through with rain and blood. His small hands pressed against his side, trembling, trying to hold together what was clearly falling apart. His face was pale, too pale, and his lips moved soundlessly, forming words no one would ever hear. Lucien crouched beside him, his movements careful, controlled. The boy's eyes flickered open, wide, dark, brimming with pain and something that looked dangerously close to surrender. "Don't," Lucien said quietly, his voice low and steady. "Don't close your eyes." The boy blinked. His gaze focused slowly, struggling to find Lucien's face in the darkness. When he did, something shifted in his expression. Not fear, not relief, just recognition, as if some part of him had been waiting for this moment. "It hurts," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know." Lucien's hand hovered over the wound, assessing. Deep, too deep. The scent of blood was overwhelming now, thick and metallic, but beneath it, that wild undertone persisted. It clung to the boy's skin like a second heartbeat, primal and untamed. Lucien knew that scent. He'd smelled it before, decades ago, in forests where moonlight turned to silver fire and the earth itself seemed to howl. But he'd made a choice then to stay away from those territories, to respect boundaries written in blood and instinct. And yet here he was, holding a child who carried that scent like a birthright. "What's your name?" Lucien asked, already lifting the boy into his arms. The child weighed almost nothing, fragile as glass, warm in a way that made Lucien's cold skin ache with contrast. "Elias," the boy breathed, his head lolled against Lucien's chest, his small fingers clutching weakly at the vampire's coat. I got lost. They said I shouldn't leave the den, but I wanted to see." His voice faded. His eyes began to close. "Elias." Lucien's voice sharpened, cutting through the fog, trying to claim the boy. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? Stay." The boy's eyes opened again, just barely. A tear slipped down his cheek, mixing with the rain still clinging to his skin. "Are you an angel?" Lucien almost smiled. "Almost. No, I'm much worse." But he moved anyway, faster than mortal eyes could track, carrying the boy through the labyrinth of streets toward the only place he knew was safe, his own sanctuary, hidden deep within the old quarter where even the bravest humans fear to tread. The mansion rose from the darkness like a monument to forgotten elegance. Stone walls covered in ivy, windows tall and narrow as if watching the world through suspicious eyes. Lucien slipped through the iron gate and up the steps, his grip on Elias never faltering. Inside, the air was different, cooler, quieter, the kind of silence that came from isolation, from centuries of solitude layered like dust over everything. Lucien laid the boy on the chaise in the library, the firelight casting soft shadows across his pale face. He worked quickly, efficiently, stripping away the torn fabric, cleaning the wound with hands that had once ended lives but now moved with something disturbingly close to tenderness. The gash was deep, jagged, as if made by claws or teeth. Lucien's jaw clenched. He'd seen wounds like this before, but never on a child. Never on someone so small, so breakable. He stitched the wound closed with thread he'd used countless times for his own injuries. Each movement precise, deliberate. The boy whimpered softly but didn't wake. His breathing evened out, shallow but steady, and for the first time since Lucien had found him, the tension in the small body began to ease. When it was done, Lucien sat back, his hands stained red, his mind racing. He should send the boy away. Return him to wherever he'd come from. Forget this night had ever happened. But as he looked down at Elias, at the rise and fall of his chest, at the way his small fingers still clutched the edge of the blanket Lucien had draped over him, something unfamiliar stirred in the vampire's chest. Protectiveness. It was absurd, dangerous, foolish, and yet undeniable. Lucien stood, moving to the window. He stared out at the night, at the shadows that belonged to him, at the world he'd ruled for so long without question. And then the wind shifted. It was subtle at first, a change in pressure, a whisper of something ancient riding the breeze. Lucien's entire body went still, every sense sharpening to a razor's edge. The scent hit him like a physical blow. Wild, raw, territorial, forest in fur and fury. He turned slowly, his eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the gates. And there, just at the edge of the light, he saw them, eyes, dozens of them, glowing gold and silver in the night, unblinking, watching, waiting. Lucien's breath didn't quicken. He had no need for breath. But something inside him tightened, coiled, prepared for violence even as his mind calculated the impossibility of what he was seeing. 50 wolves, maybe more, all perfectly still, all perfectly silent, all surrounding his home in a circle, so precise it could only be deliberate. And in that moment, as the first rays of dawn began to touch the horizon, Lucien understood. The boy wasn't just lost. He was someone's son, and that someone had come to collect. Dawn arrived not with light, but with pressure. It filled the air like an invisible hand pressing down on the earth, heavy and absolute. Lucien stood at the window, motionless, his pale eyes tracking the movement of shadows that weren't quite shadows at all. The wolves hadn't advanced. They hadn't retreated. They simply waited. 50 pairs of eyes, burning with intelligence that had nothing to do with animals and everything to do with something far older. Behind him, Elias stirred, where the boy's voice was weak, threaded with pain and confusion. Lucien didn't turn, couldn't afford to break his focus. Not when the balance between survival and slaughter hung on a thread, so thin it might snap with a single wrong breath. "You're safe," Lucien said quietly. "For now." "Who are you?" "Someone who made a mistake." The words were bitter on his tongue, but true. In 3 centuries of existence, Lucien had learned the rules that kept predators like him alive. Rule number 1, never interfere with pack business. Rule number 2, never, under any circumstances, touch what belongs to an alpha. He'd broken both in a single night. "I want go home," Elias whispered. There was no demand in his voice, no petulance, just exhaustion, and a longing so deep it made something in Lucien's chest ache. "I know." Lucien finally turned, his gaze settling on the boy. In the firelight, Elias looked even smaller, even more fragile. The bandages wrapped around his torso were already spotted with red, proof that the wound ran deeper than flesh. But I don't think they're going to let me take you there. Elias followed Lucien's gaze toward the window. His dark eyes widened when he saw the glowing pair staring back. For a moment his face went pale. But then something else flickered across his expression. Not fear, recognition, and beneath that, shame. "They're here because of me," Elias said softly. "Aren't they?" Lucien didn't answer. Didn't need to. The boy sat up slowly, wincing with every movement. "I wasn't supposed to leave. Papa said," he said the city was dangerous, that there were things in the dark that wouldn't understand what I am. But I wanted to see it. Just once. His voice cracked. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause anything." Lucien moved away from the window, kneeling so he was at eye level with the boy. Up close, he could see the traces of his father in him. The strong line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes held steady even when his body trembled. "You were hurt. I helped. That's all. But you're—" Elias hesitated, his gaze searching Lucien's face with an intensity that felt far too old for a child. "You're a vampire. I am. And my father is the Alpha." The word hung between them like a sword. Elias looked down at his hands, his small fingers twisting together. "He's going to be so angry. With you, with everyone." The boy's voice dropped to a whisper. "He doesn't like it when people break the rules. And I broke all of them." Before Lucien could respond, the pressure in the air shifted again. This time, it wasn't subtle. It crashed over the mansion like a wave, so forceful that the windows rattled and the fire guttered in its hearth. A presence. Not just wolves. Not just watchers. Something else. Something massive. Lucien was on his feet instantly, every instinct screaming danger. He moved to the window again, his body positioned between Elias and whatever was coming, and what he saw made even his ancient heart falter. The wolves had parted. They stood in two perfect lines, creating a path from the forest edge to the mansion gates. And walking between them, slow and deliberate, was a figure that made the night itself seem to bow. The Alpha. He was taller than Lucien had imagined, broader. His presence alone seemed to warp the space around him, bending reality to acknowledge his authority. He wore simple clothes, dark pants, a shirt unbuttoned at the collar, but there was nothing simple about the way he moved. Every step was measured, controlled, the walk of something that had never known fear, because it had never needed to. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples. His face was carved from stone and fury, all sharp angles and hard lines. But it was his eyes that truly captured attention, molten gold, burning with an intensity that could strip souls bare. He stopped at the gate. The iron bars looked fragile against him, as if they existed only because he allowed them to. For a long moment, the Alpha simply stood there, his gaze fixed on the mansion, on Lucien, on the window where the vampire stood with his son, behind him. Then he spoke. His voice was deep, resonant, carrying across the distance as if the air itself conspired to deliver it. "Bring him out." 3 words. No threat, no plea, just a command that expected obedience. Lucien's hands curled into fists. Every cell in his body recognized the danger. This wasn't just an Alpha. This was the Alpha, leader of the largest pack in the Northern Territories, a werewolf whose name alone made even vampires reconsider their immortality. Lucien Thorne. No relation to Lucien despite the shared surname. Just a cruel coincidence that felt like fate mocking them both. "I can't do that," Lucien said, his voice low but carrying. He didn't need to shout. The Alpha would hear him. Cale tilted his head slightly, the gesture almost curious. "You're protecting my son from me?" "I'm protecting an injured child from a confrontation he's not strong enough to survive." The words were out before Lucien could stop them. Bold, possibly suicidal, but true. Behind him, Elias gasped softly. "Don't," the boy whispered. "Please don't make him angry." But it was too late. The Alpha's expression shifted. Not toward rage, toward something colder, more dangerous. He took a single step forward, and the gate groaned, the iron bending slightly under pressure that hadn't even touched it. You don't know what you're interfering with. Vampire. Then enlighten me. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. And then, impossibly, the Alpha smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was a smile of a predator acknowledging another predator. You saved his life. It wasn't a question. I did. Why? Lucien hesitated. He didn't have a good answer. Didn't have a logical one. Because he was dying. And you cared. I responded. You cared. Cale repeated. And this time there was something in his voice that Lucien couldn't quite place. Not gratitude. Not anger. Something in between. You, an apex vampire, a creature who has spent centuries avoiding my kind, chose to save my son's life. I didn't know who he was. Would it have mattered? The question hit harder than any blow. Lucien looked back at Elias, at the boy who called him an angel, who'd trusted him despite every reason not to. Would it have mattered? Would he have walked away if he'd known the truth? He wanted to say yes. Wanted to believe his survival instincts were stronger than whatever foolish impulse had made him lift that child into his arms. But the lie wouldn't come. No, Lucien said finally, quietly. It wouldn't have. For a long moment, Cale simply stared at him. The gold in his eyes seemed to burn brighter, as if searching for deception and finding none. Then he stepped back. The gate stopped groaning. The pressure in the air eased slightly. The sun will rise soon, Cale said. You'll need shelter. My son will need time to heal properly. We'll return at nightfall. He paused, his gaze hardening. And then, vampire, you and I will talk about what you're owed and what you've taken. Before Lucien could respond, the Alpha turned and walked back to the parted lines of wolves. They closed ranks behind him, and within moments, the forest had swallowed them all whole. The mansion fell silent. Lucien stood at the window for a long time, his mind racing with possibilities, each one more dangerous than the last. Behind him, Elias spoke softly. He didn't hurt you. No, he could have. Yes. Then why didn't he? Lucien turned to face the boy. In the growing light of dawn, Elias looked even younger, even more lost. Because, Lucien said slowly, choosing his words carefully, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to someone isn't to hurt them. It's to make them wait. Elias frowned, not quite understanding. But Lucien understood perfectly. The Alpha had come, had assessed, had left, and in doing so, he'd made one thing absolutely clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. Nightfall was coming, and with it, judgment. The day passed in silence. Lucien moved to the mansion like a ghost, his footsteps echoing against marble floors worn smooth by centuries. He didn't sleep, hadn't needed to in decades, but he rested, settling into the leather chair at his study, while shadows stretched and shifted across the walls. Elias slept fitfully in the library, his small body curled beneath the blanket Lucien had given him. Every few hours, Lucien checked on him, noting the flush returning to his cheeks, the steadier rhythm of his breathing. The boy was healing, faster than a human would, slower than a full werewolf, caught between two worlds, just like the night had caught them both. As afternoon bled into evening, Lucien found himself standing before a bookshelf he hadn't touched in years. His fingers traced the spine of an ancient tome, leather cracked with age, pages yellowed and brittle. The Treaty of Silver Moon, written in blood and binding magic over 2 centuries ago. He opened it carefully, his pale eyes scanning words he'd helped write. Article 7. No vampire shall interfere in the internal affairs of pack hierarchy. No werewolf shall hunt within vampire territories without permission. Violations will be met with immediate forfeiture of life or exile. Article 12. The young of both species ought to be considered sacred ground. Any harm brought to a child, deliberate or accidental, constitutes an act of war. Lucien's jaw tightened. He'd saved Elias, protected him. By the letter of the treaty, he'd done nothing wrong. But treaties were written by diplomats. They were interpreted by warriors. And Cale Thorne was no diplomat. What are you reading? Lucien turned. Elias stood in the doorway, one hand pressed against his bandaged side. He looked better, color in his face, steadiness in his stance, but exhaustion still clung to him like a second skin. History. Lucien said simply, closing the book. How do you feel? Sore, but better. Elias moved into the study, his dark eyes curious as they swept over the shelves, the artifacts, the pieces of a life too long to fit in any single room. This place is old. It is like you. A faint smile touched Lucien's lips. Older, actually. I acquired it from someone who'd grown tired of immortality. Elias frowned. Can that happen? Getting tired of living forever? More often than you'd think. The boy wandered to the window, staring out at the forest beyond. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. They're still out there, he said softly. I can feel them. Your pack. My family. Elias's voice was barely a whisper. They're scared, angry, confused. I can feel it all like static in my head. Lucien moved to stand beside him. You're bonded to them. It's more than that. I'm supposed to be Alpha someday. That's what Papa says. So the pack bond is stronger with me. Everything they feel, I feel. Everything I feel. He trailed off, his expression troubled. He feels it too, Lucien finished quietly. Elias nodded. He knew the moment I got hurt. That's why they came so fast. He probably felt me being afraid, felt the pain, and then... The boy's voice cracked. And then he felt me trust you. The words hung in the air like confession. Lucien understood now. This wasn't just about a vampire touching an alpha son. This was about Cale feeling his child's fear transform into trust. Trust given to a creature that should have been an enemy. Does he know I'm awake? Elias asked. If you can feel them, then yes. He knows. The boy's shoulders sagged. He's so disappointed. I can feel that too. In me, in both of us. Elias turned away from the window, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I broke the rules. Left the den. Got hurt. Made him come here. Made him. He stopped, struggling for words. Made him owe something to a vampire. He doesn't owe me anything. Yes, he does. You saved my life. In our world, that's a debt that can't be ignored. Elias wiped at his eyes roughly, the gesture heartbreakingly young. Blood odes are sacred. If someone saved your life, you owe them yours. And if it's the Alpha son, he didn't need to finish. Lucien understood. By saving Elias, he'd bound Cale him through ancient laws neither of them could break. The Alpha would have to acknowledge the debt, would have to offer something in return. And judging by the fury Lucien had sensed in those molten gold eyes, Cale would rather tear his own heart out than admit he owed a vampire anything. I didn't know, Lucien said quietly. I didn't save you for a debt. I know, but that doesn't change what is. Before Lucien could respond, the pressure returned. It slammed into the mansion like a physical force, rattling windows, stirring the air itself. Elias gasped, his hand flying to his chest as if struck. Outside, the forest erupted with sound, howls rising and falling in a chorus that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. They were here. Lucien moved to the front door, his senses sharpening. Beside him, Elias followed, his steps small but determined. You should stay inside, Lucien said. He's my father. I should face him. You're injured. I'm his son. There was steel in the boy's voice now, an echo of the Alpha's authority. I won't hide. Lucien studied him for a moment, seeing not a child but the beginning of something more, the seeds of leadership buried deep but already taking root. He nodded once, then opened the door. The night greeted them with silence. The wolves had multiplied. What had been 50 now looked like 100, maybe more, their bodies forming a living wall around the mansion. But they weren't the threat. The Alpha stood at the gate again, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman, tall and fierce, her silver hair braided down her back. Her eyes were the same molten gold as Cale's. But whereas hell controlled fury, hers burned with barely restrained violence. She looked at Lucien like he was prey, like she was calculating exactly how long it would take to tear him apart. On Cale's other side stood a man nearly as large as the Alpha himself, his arms crossed, his expression carved from granite. His scent carried the weight of a beta, second-in-command enforcer, the one who turned the Alphas will into action. This wasn't a retrieval party. This was a war council. Cale's gaze swept over Lucien, then settled on Elias. The boy stood straight despite his injury, his chin lifted in defiance or perhaps resignation. "Elias," Cale said, not angry, not relieved, just tired. "Come here." The boy hesitated. His eyes flicked to Lucien, a silent question in them. Lucien nodded. "Go." Elias walked forward slowly, each step measured. When he reached the gate, Cale opened it with a gesture, and the boy slipped through. The Alpha knelt, his large hand settling on Elias's shoulders. His eyes searched his son's face for injuries, for lies, for anything that might explain the chaos of the past day. "Are you hurt?" "Not anymore." "Did he harm you?" "He saved me, Papa." The words were quiet, but they echoed like thunder. Cale's jaw tightened. His gaze lifted to Lucien, and in those gold eyes, the vampire saw war raging. Pride, fury, gratitude, resentment, all battling for dominance. "You saved my son's life," Cale said finally. "That is a debt I cannot ignore." "I don't want your debt. That's not how this works." The Alpha stood, keeping one hand on Elias's shoulder. "Blood oaths are binding. You acted. The debt exists. Denying it insults us both." Lucien's hands curled into fists. "Then what do you propose?" Cale was silent for a long moment. The woman beside him leaned in, whispering something too low for even Lucien to hear. The Alpha's expression darkened, but he nodded. "You will be granted safe passage through our territories." Cale said, "For as long as the debt stands, no wolf under my command will hunt you. You'll be allowed to feed within our lands, if hunger drives you, and if you require assistance." He paused, the words clearly tasting bitter. "You may call on me. Once." It was generous. More than generous. It was a violation of every instinct an Alpha had. But it wasn't enough. The woman stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "And you'll never touch our young again. You'll stay away from our territories unless absolutely necessary." "You'll..." "Mira." Cale's voice was quiet, but it cut like steel. "Enough." She fell silent, but her glare promised violence if Lucien so much as breathed wrong. Lucien looked at Elias. The boy stood between two worlds, his expression caught between relief and sorrow. He'd be safe now, protected, but the price of that safety was clear. The wall between vampire and werewolf will remain unbroken, and somehow that felt like a greater wound than any claw could carve. "I accept your terms," Lucien said quietly. Cale nodded. He turned to leave, guiding Elias with him, but the boy pulled away, running back to the gate. His small hands gripped the iron bars as he looked up at Lucien. "Thank you," Elias whispered, "for everything." Lucien crouched, meeting the boy's eyes. "Stay out of alleys." A small smile touched Elias's lips. "I will." Then he was gone, led away by his father into the forest where 50, no, 100, wolves waited to welcome their prince home. Lucien stood alone, watching until the last pair of glowing eyes disappeared into the dark. The debt was paid, the treaty honored, the boundaries redrawn. Everything was as it should be. So why did it feel like he'd just lost something he hadn't even known he'd found? 3 months passed like water through cupped hands. Lucien returned to his routines, hunting in the deep hours, reading through centuries of accumulated knowledge, existing in the spaces between heartbeats. The mansion felt emptier somehow, though nothing had changed. The same shadows, the same silence, the same eternal solitude he'd chosen long ago. But at night, when the wind carried the scent of pine and earth from the forest, he found himself standing at the window, listening for howls that never came. The treaty held. No werewolves crossed into his territory. He didn't venture into theirs. The dead existed in theory, acknowledged but uncalled. It was clean, simple, safe. It was killing him. Not physically. Vampires didn't die from loneliness. But something inside him had shifted the night he'd held a dying boy in his arms. Some wall he'd spent centuries building had cracked, and through that crack, light had poured in, and now, standing in the darkness he'd always call home, Lucien realized the shadows felt less like sanctuary and more like a tomb. He was considering leaving, relocating to a new city, a new territory, a fresh start, when the howl came. It tore through the night, like a wound in reality itself. Not the territorial howls he'd heard before, not the hunt calls or the pack songs. This was different. This was wrong. This was a scream wearing a wolf's voice, raw with pain and desperate with fear. Every instinct told Lucien to ignore it. It wasn't his concern, wasn't his pack, wasn't his world. But his feet were already moving. He ran to the forest faster than wind, faster than thought, his vampire speed turning the world into a blur of dark trees and silver moonlight. The howl came again, closer now, and beneath it he heard something else. Snarls, growls, the sound of bodies colliding with brutal force. Lucien burst into a clearing and stopped cold. Elias. The boy was surrounded by 5 wolves. But these weren't pack members. Their scent was wrong, foreign, aggressive, touched with the sour tang of rogues. Elias stood his ground despite being outnumbered, despite the blood streaking down his arm, despite the terror Lucien could see in his dark eyes. The boy had shifted partially, claws extended, teeth sharp, caught between human and wolf in the way young werewolves did when fear overrode control. One of the rogues lunged. Lucien moved. He was between them before the wolf could land, his hand catching the creature mid-leap and slamming it into the ground with enough force to crater the earth. The other rogue snarled, turning their attention to this new threat. "Run," Lucien said quietly, not looking at Elias. "Now! I can't leave you. Run!" The command held centuries of authority. Elias ran. The rogues attacked as one. Lucien met them with the full weight of what he was. An apex vampire, a creature that had survived wars and assassinations and the slow erosion of time itself. He moved like death given form, his strikes precise and devastating. Bones shattered. Flesh tore. Blood painted the grass black under moonlight. It was over in seconds. The rogues lay broken and still, their bodies already beginning the slow shift back to human form that came with death. Lucien stood among them, breathing hard despite not needing air, his hands stained red, his mind racing. Rogues in Alpha territory, attacking the air. This wasn't random. This was an act of war. A growl rumbled behind him. Lucien turned slowly. Kale stood at the edge of the clearing, his massive wolf form towering over the carnage. His golden eyes were fixed on Lucien, burning with an intensity that could have melted stone. Behind him, the pack emerged from the trees, dozens of wolves, all watching, all waiting for their alpha's command. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Kale shifted. The transformation was fluid, seamless, centuries of experience making it look effortless. One moment, a wolf, the next a man, standing naked and unashamed in the moonlight, power radiating from him like heat from a star. He looked at the dead rogues, at Lucien's bloodstained hands, at the direction Elias had run. "You broke the treaty?" Kale said quietly. "He was dying. He's pack. We would have handled it. Not fast enough." Lucien met the Alpha's gaze without flinching. "I heard him howl. I responded. If that's a violation, then execute me. But I won't apologize for it." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Then Kale did something Lucien never expected. He smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It wasn't warm. But it was real. "You really don't understand how this works, do you?" "Apparently not. The debt was paid. You should have stayed away. Should have let us handle our own problems." Kale moved closer, his bare feet silent on the blood-soaked grass. "But you didn't. You came anyway, knowing it would complicate things, knowing it would cost you." He stopped just out of arm's reach. "Why?" Lucien wanted to have a good answer, a logical one, something that would make sense to both of them. But all he had was the truth. "Because 3 months ago, a boy called me an angel, and I've been trying to remember what that felt like ever since." The words hung between them like a bridge. Cale studied him for a long moment, those gold eyes seeing far more than Lucien was comfortable revealing. Then the Alpha turned, gesturing to the pack. Clear the rogues. Find out who sent them, and bring Elias home. He looked back at Lucien. You, come with me. It wasn't a request. They walked through the forest in silence, Cale still naked and unbothered, Lucien still covered in blood and questions. They climbed higher into the mountains, leaving the packed territories behind, until they reached a ridge overlooking a valley bathed in moonlight. Cale sat on a boulder, his posture relaxed despite the cold. Lucien remained standing, waiting. I was wrong about you, Cale said finally. When you saved Elias, I thought you were playing some game, building leverage, trying to weaken the pack through debt. I wasn't. I know. That's the problem. The Alpha looked up at him, and for the first time, Lucien saw something other than fury or authority in those eyes. He saw exhaustion, bone deep and ancient. I've spent 30 years as Alpha, 30 years making sure my pack survived, making sure the treaties held, making sure my son would inherit a world that wouldn't tear him apart. His hands curled into fists. And then you came along and made him trust you in a single night, made him feel safe with a vampire, made him question everything I've taught him about enemies and boundaries and survival. I didn't mean to. I know. That's what makes it worse. Cale stood, moving to the edge of the ridge. The rogues tonight? They're a symptom of something bigger. There are factions within werewolf territories that want war, that see the treaties as weakness, that want to purge every vampire from existence and claim the world for ourselves. He looked back at Lucien. If they find out Elias trusts you, they'll use it against him, against me, against everything I've built. Lucien felt the weight of it settling over him. What are you saying? I'm saying you've made yourself part of this, whether you wanted to be or not. I'm saying the debt is no longer theoretical. I'm saying, Cale's jaw tightened. I'm saying my son asks about you every day, wants to know if you're safe, if you're alone, if you remember him. The words hit harder than any physical blow. And I'm saying, Cale continued, his voice dropping lower, that maybe it's time we reconsider what the treaties are really protecting us from. Lucien stared at him, trying to process the implications. You want to change the treaty? I want to acknowledge that maybe the greatest threat isn't each other. Maybe it's a refusal to see past old wounds and older fears. Cale moved closer, and Lucien realized this was the first time the Alpha had approached him without aggression. You saved my son twice now. Both times at risk to yourself. Both times without asking for anything in return. That's not an enemy. That's... He trailed off, as if the word itself was too dangerous to speak. An ally, Lucien finished quietly. Cale nodded. The pack won't accept it easily. Mira will probably try to kill you at least once. The rogues will use it as proof that I betrayed our kind. But he extended his hand. If you're willing to stand in that storm with me, I'll make sure you don't stand alone. Lucien looked at the offered hand, at the Alpha who'd spent centuries as his enemy, offering something that looked dangerously close to friendship. Every survival instinct screamed at him to refuse, to walk away, to return to the safe, lonely darkness he'd always known. But then he thought of Elias, of the boy who trusted him, of the howl that had brought him running despite knowing better. He took Cale's hand. The grip was firm, warm, alive in a way Lucien had forgotten hands could be. This is going to complicate everything, Lucien said. Good. Cale replied, a real smile touching his lips for the first time. I was getting bored with simple. They stood there on the ridge as dawn began to touch the horizon, a vampire and a werewolf, creating something new from the ruins of old treaties and ancient fears. Below, in the valley, the pack began to howl. Not a warning, not a threat, a welcome. And for the first time in 3 centuries, Lucien Thorne allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd found something worth living forever to protect. The sun rose, and the shadows learned to howl.